What would you do if you were handcuffed at an airport gate? Not for what you did, but for what you look like. This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about dignity, courage, and the power of one man to turn humiliation into history. Stay with us. You'll leave inspired. It was just another boarding call at Gate 32. Families were juggling carry-ons, earbuds were popping in, and the overhead speakers echoed the final boarding announcement for Flight 827 to Washington, D.C. Then through the bustle, he appeared. A tall black man in a navy blue suit, crisp shirt, and polished Oxfords. Rolling a sleek black suitcase behind him, he moved with a kind of quiet authority, like a man used to rooms where people listened when he spoke. Some passengers glanced up briefly, registering his presence the way people notice someone who doesn't quite blend in, and not because of color, because of composure. He reached for his phone to scan the boarding pass, but before the scanner could even beep, a shout cut through the terminal. "Sir, step away from the gate!" Everyone turned. A white airport police officer, buzz cut tight and eyes sharp, was storming through the crowd like he had just spotted a fugitive. One hand was already resting on his holster, the other pointed dead at the man in the suit. "ID now!" The suited man blinked, surprised, but not rattled. "Is there a problem, officer?" The cop didn't answer. He didn't need to, not in his mind. His posture said everything. "You fit the description," the officer snapped. "I'm detaining you for questioning." People began pulling out phones. The suited man didn't flinch, didn't resist. His voice stayed measured. "I'm boarding this flight. That's all." But the officer didn't wait. He reached for the man's wrist, gripping it tight, and within seconds, cold steel clamped shut. Handcuffed. Right there. At the gate. Gasps rippled through the terminal like thunder after a lightning strike. A child dropped her juice box. A flight attendant covered her mouth. And somewhere in the back, a man whispered, "This can't be real." The suited man stood still, his hands now shackled behind him, as cameras clicked and videos rolled. No yelling, no outburst. Just quiet dignity, as if he had seen this play out before. And the officer? His face was smug, confident, certain he had done the right thing. But in the crowd, an airline employee was frozen near the counter, eyes wide, face drained of color. She looked at the name on the screen, then at the man in cuffs. "Wait, that can't be," she whispered, before breaking into a sprint toward them. The cop didn't see her coming. He had no idea who the man in front of him really was. No idea how big of a mistake he'd just made. But he was about to find out. And in seconds, that arrogance on his face would turn into regret. The air inside Gate 32 had turned electric. Phones were up, faces were frozen. Nobody dared to breathe as the black man in the designer suit stood cuffed, hands behind his back like a criminal, surrounded by whispers and judgment. "I said he matched the description," the cop barked again, now louder, trying to sound in control as if volume would cover the cracks in his logic. "Suspicious male, dark suit, carry-on bag, standing near the gate alone." That was all he needed, apparently. No further questions asked. Just skin tone, a vague hunch, and a badge. The man remained calm, which somehow made it worse. No pleading, no outrage, just a quiet stillness that unnerved even the bystanders. "I'm Dr. Rhodes," he said softly, his voice deep and level. "I have my ID and boarding pass. Check my bag." But the officer didn't check. He couldn't, because in his mind, this wasn't a man trying to board a plane. This was a threat. The crowd murmured louder. Tension built like pressure in a sealed cabin. A young mother holding a stroller spoke up. "He was just in line like the rest of us." A man in a business suit shook his head. "This is profiling. You're making a mistake." Still, the cop doubled down. "You don't know what you're talking about. Stand back." But even he was starting to sweat now, not from exertion, from the creeping realization that he might have jumped too fast. Then the gate agent burst onto the scene, mid-30s, black blazer, airline badge on her lanyard. She ran past the crowd, clutching a tablet and a printed manifest. "Officer! Officer! Stop! Wait!" she shouted, pushing through. Her voice cut through everything like a blade. "That man is not a suspect. That's our keynote guest, Dr. Malcolm Rhodes. He's flying first class to DC under airline sponsorship. He's the speaker for the World Aviation Security Summit. She held out the tablet. Name, photo, first class seat, clearance codes, TSA pre-check, global credentials, everything matched. Every single detail. The officer's jaw clenched. His eyes scanned the screen once. Then again. His breath caught. A pause. A beat. Then the wave of realization hit him. The man he'd handcuffed in front of dozens of witnesses, in front of cameras, wasn't just innocent. He was an elite security expert, one who'd worked with government agencies, one who'd trained police departments, one who'd written the very handbook this officer had likely skimmed in training. The silence that followed was heavier than anything anyone could remember in that terminal. The only sound was the click of a phone recording, and then the soft, steady voice of Dr. Rhodes once again. Are we done here? He wasn't just asking about the cuffs. He was asking about centuries of assumptions. And suddenly the officer knew. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had made a moment, one the world would never forget. The cop stood frozen, hand still hovering near his holster, as the reality of what he'd just done sank in like cold water through a crack in the armor. The gate agent was no longer pleading. She was furious. You handcuffed Dr. Malcolm Rhodes without verifying a single fact. Do you even know who he is? The crowd around them had grown. Passengers on delayed flights, airport workers, curious onlookers with phones raised high. It wasn't just a scene now. It was a spectacle. The officer stammered. He matched the description. Dark clothing, male. So do half the men in this terminal, she shot back. The suitcase Dr. Rhodes had been pulling had toppled in the scuffle. The gate agent picked it up, opened the front flap, and pulled out a black leather folio. She held it up like evidence. Inside, a government ID, a Department of Homeland Security visitor badge, credentials for the World Aviation Security Summit. A program that read, Keynote Speaker, Dr. Malcolm Rhodes, Global Security Strategist. Author, U.S. Air Force veteran. Every word hit like a punch to the gut. The officer's face flushed red. His hands trembled as he reached for the keys on his belt. Click. The cuffs snapped open, but it was too late. You can unlock wrists. You can't unmake a public humiliation. Dr. Rhodes slowly rotated his shoulders, regaining movement. He didn't lash out. He didn't raise his voice. He simply turned and looked the officer square in the eye. That gaze didn't hold anger. It didn't hold fear. It held something worse. Disappointment. You didn't ask. You assumed, Dr. Rhodes said calmly. And your assumption speaks louder than your badge. The cop opened his mouth as if to explain, to reach for some excuse, some lifeline. But before he could speak, another voice cut in. Dr. Rhodes? Everyone turned. A tall man in a charcoal suit, earpiece tucked into his collar, walked toward them briskly. He wore a Homeland Security badge on his chest. Behind him were two more agents and a nervous airline executive. I'm so sorry, sir. We were tracking your arrival for a secure escort. We had no idea. He stopped when he saw the cuffs in the officer's hand. What the hell happened here? Nobody answered. Because what could they say? That a highly decorated black man, a former Air Force intelligence officer turned global aviation consultant, was seen as a threat at his own event. Simply because of how he looked? The Homeland agent turned to the officer. Badge, now. The officer hesitated. I said, hand me your badge. And right there in front of the crowd, cameras still rolling, the cop removed it, slowly, reluctantly. He didn't just lose a badge. He lost his credibility, his authority, and soon his job. But worst of all, he had no idea that this was just the beginning, because Dr. Rhodes hadn't even started speaking yet. For a moment, no one moved. It was like time had frozen in Gate 32, caught between the echo of metal cuffs being removed and the heavy silence of an audience grappling with what they had just witnessed. Then slowly, murmurs began to rise. That was Dr. Rhodes? Isn't he the guy on CNN last month? My God, he trains our security forces. One woman covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. A teenage boy looked down at the screen on his phone. It's already online. He turned the screen to his mother. There it was, a 19-second clip of Dr. Rhodes being cuffed at the gate, looking dignified, composed, while the officer yanked his wrist behind his back. The caption read, "Black expert wrongly handcuffed at airport, minutes before speaking at a security summit." It had 5,000 views, then 8,000, then 20,000, and that was just the beginning. A white-haired businessman stepped forward. "I've followed his work for years. That man literally wrote the FAA's anti-terror protocol." Another woman, clutching her child's hand, shook her head. "If he can be handcuffed for nothing, what chance does my son have?" The officer stood off to the side now, badge surrendered, staring into space, his eyes glassy, mouth set in a tight, haunted line. He wasn't the center of control anymore. He was the center of shame, and every phone camera was locked on him. A local news crew that had arrived early for the summit caught the end of the incident live. Their reporter whispered into her mic, "This is not how today was supposed to start." The airline executive, sweating, red-faced, panic written across every feature, hurried over to Dr. Rhodes, stammering apologies. "Dr. Rhodes, please, let us escort you to the lounge. We'll prepare a formal—" "Doctor." Rhodes held up one hand, silencing him. "I'll board with the rest of the passengers," he said. "I won't let one man's bias become everyone's burden." The crowd parted for him, not because he demanded it, because he'd earned it. He walked to the gate agent, now visibly shaken. She scanned his boarding pass with trembling hands. "Beep, first class. Seat 2A. He turned back, paused, and looked over the crowd one last time. Then he said something that would go viral in minutes. "The irony isn't that I was handcuffed at a security summit. The irony is that this incident proves why we still need one." Gasps, whispers, silence, and then applause. Not everyone clapped, but those who did clapped like they were waking up from a dream they didn't know they'd been trapped in. As Dr. Rhodes walked down the jet bridge, a hush fell over Gate 32. Not because it was over, but because everyone there knew. This story was just beginning. By the time Flight 827 touched down in Washington, D.C., the internet had exploded. The video from Gate 32, just under 20 seconds long, was now clipped, captioned, and copied across every platform imaginable. Dr. Rhodes, Sarchuchakar Gate 32 incident, flying while black. In less than 3 hours, it had been viewed over 6 million times. Celebrities reposted it. Civil rights leaders called it textbook profiling, and journalists across the country scrambled to uncover the story behind the man whose calm defiance had become the day's most powerful image. By nightfall, his name was on every major network. Security expert detained while headlining security summit. CNN, Dr. Rhodes incident sparks TSA policy questions. NBC, airline apologizes after hero treated like a threat. The New York Times. But it wasn't just news channels. Think pieces poured in from professors, travelers, veterans, and even law enforcement leaders who had once trained under him. "I remember when Dr. Rhodes came to our precinct. He taught us about implicit bias. The irony burns." Twitter was flooded with photos of him at military ceremonies, shaking hands with heads of state, delivering TED Talks about post-9/11 aviation safety. This wasn't just a black man in cuffs anymore. This was a decorated veteran, a scholar, a father, a patriot, and now a reluctant symbol of everything still broken in the system he'd dedicated his life to fixing. In D.C., as he exited the gate, there were reporters waiting. "Dr. Rhodes, any comment on what happened at the airport? Do you plan to sue the department? Was this racial profiling?" He raised a hand not to wave them off, but to signal silence. "I will address it when I take the stage," he said calmly. Not before. Back at the airline's headquarters, a full-scale crisis response team had been activated. CEOs were on calls. PR teams drafted statements. Someone suggested flying Dr. Rhodes in a private jet for future engagements. Another whispered, Should we offer him a board seat? But none of that could erase what the world had seen. Handcuffs on a man who built the very safety systems he was suspected of breaking. It was a nightmare for the airline, a meltdown for the local police department, and a mirror held up to America, once again reflecting a truth that many were still unwilling to face. And for the officer who'd made the arrest, his name hadn't been released yet, but online sleuths had already found it. Old body cam footage surfaced. Previous complaints were unearthed. Activists began calling for accountability. But for Dr. Rhodes, this was no time for vengeance. He sat quietly in his hotel room, tie loosened, laptop open. He wasn't angry, he was focused, because tomorrow he'd walk onto the stage of the World Aviation Security Summit. And the world wouldn't just be listening to his speech, they'd be watching his every word. The next morning, the grand ballroom of the Marlow Convention Center was standing room only. Security was doubled. News crews were lined along the back wall. Every chair was filled, not just by aviation officials and law enforcement, but by government reps, advocates, and everyday citizens who'd driven hours to be there. And in the front row, a row of uniformed military veterans sat upright, eyes locked on the stage. They didn't come for the summit. They came for the man. When Dr. Malcolm Rhodes stepped into the spotlight, the room stood to its feet. Applause thundered, not polite applause, not industry applause. This was the kind of sound people make when they see justice trying to stand tall again. He didn't wave, he didn't smile. He let the room breathe, then raised a hand, slowly. Silence returned like a tide pulling back to sea. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and then he began. Before I speak on national security, I need to speak on something far more dangerous. Assumption. You could hear a pin drop. Yesterday, I was mistaken for a threat at an airport gate, not because of a weapon, not because of behavior, but because of what I looked like while waiting for a plane. I was cuffed before they asked who I was, before they checked credentials, before anyone did a single thing we teach in basic protocol. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to point out that if this can happen to me, a vetted security strategist, a military veteran, a government advisor, then what happens every day to those without titles, without cameras? He scanned the audience. A ripple of emotion passed over faces. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a mirror. One that reflects what too many people of color experience in places that claim to be secure. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same pair of handcuffs that had been snapped onto his wrists the day before. He held them up. These aren't just metal, they're memory. They tell a story louder than a siren, and unless we rewrite the story, they will keep closing around the wrong wrists. Gas filled the room. Some people blinked back tears. He placed the cuffs gently on the podium. The system isn't broken. It was built this way. And now we get to decide whether we change it or continue pretending it's just a one-time incident. I've spent my life protecting this country, but today I challenge you to protect the people in it. All of them. A beat. Then, security without justice isn't safety, it's surveillance. And with that, he stepped back from the mic. The room didn't erupt. It rose, standing, silent, some with hands over hearts, some with tears falling freely, some stunned that a man who had every right to be bitter chose instead to build. In that moment, Dr. Rhodes didn't just take back his dignity, he took back the narrative. The video of Dr. Rhodes holding the handcuffs above the podium was posted online within minutes. It went viral twice, once for the speech, and again for the silence that followed. Clips flooded TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. The caption varied, but the message was the same. He didn't ask for pity, he asked for change. Within 24 hours, national outlets had broadcast the speech in full. Late-night hosts praised his composure. Morning shows played his remarks on loop. His quotes became slogans on protest signs, printed across shirts, and painted on murals. Security without justice isn't safety, it's surveillance. The words became a call to action. But this wasn't just noise. This was impact. In Washington, senators introduced the Rhodes Reform Bill, aimed at addressing racial profiling in federal transportation hubs. The bill proposed mandatory de-escalation training, expanded surveillance audits, and body cam accountability for all airport police. At TSA headquarters, an emergency panel convened. Internal reviews began. Officers were pulled from duty pending retraining. And the airline? They weren't prepared for what hit them. Dr. Rhodes had declined their offer of compensation. He didn't want hush money. Instead, he publicly challenged them. Invest that money in bias training, not damage control. Don't fix your image. Fix your infrastructure. Shareholders called emergency meetings. Their PR team worked overtime. But the damage had been done. Passengers began canceling flights. Influencers spoke out. A travel boycott began trending. But were fly fair or don't fly. Then came the lawsuits, not from Dr. Rhodes, but from passengers who had faced similar treatment in silence. Now they had a face. Now they had a platform. Now they had proof. In the small town where the officer lived, things changed overnight. His name had been leaked. Some rallied to his defense. Others condemned him. But the most notable silence? His own. The man who once made headlines for a routine detainment had now vanished from view. His badge gone. His uniform boxed. His career over. And yet Dr. Rhodes didn't mention him again. Because this was never about one man. This was about a system. And how it crumbled when it tried to label a black man as a threat. Not knowing that man helped write the book on national safety. Interviews poured in. Oprah requested a sit-down. Universities called for lectures. Time magazine named Dr. Rhodes one of the 100 most influential voices of the year. But he didn't rush to the spotlight. Instead, he quietly announced the formation of the Rhodes Foundation for Transportation Equity, dedicated to ensuring no one, of any background, ever feels unsafe in a space designed for travel. And in a rare tweet, he wrote, "I was handcuffed because someone saw my skin before my credentials. Let's build a world where that doesn't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone." The post gained 1.2 million likes in under an hour. And just like that, the gate that once closed behind him in cold steel, it opened a conversation that could never be shut again. 6 months later, the concourse at JFK International looked different. There were new signs, ones that read, "Equity in Transit, a commitment to fairness, backed by the Rhodes Standard." Airports across the country had adopted the training. New federal regulations based on the Rhodes Reform Bill were in place. Officers now underwent quarterly bias audits. Security checks were redesigned, with body cams, multilingual prompts, and real-time accountability dashboards made visible to passengers. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And that start had a name: Dr. Malcolm Rhodes. His foundation had trained over 4,000 officers. He'd spoken in 5 countries. His TED Talk, "When the Threat is Assumption," had become the most watched of the year. But what he valued most was quiet change. In one airport, a black teenager wore a hoodie that read, "Not suspicious, just traveling." In another, a Somali-American mother whispered, "Thank you," after clearing security with her children, and being greeted with respect, not suspicion. Change wasn't just happening on the news, it was in the air. And on one particular day, in the very airport where it all began, a plaque was unveiled beside Gate 32. It read, "In honor of Dr. Malcolm Rhodes, for turning injustice into infrastructure and fear into reform. May all who pass through this gate remember, dignity travels with us." He didn't ask for it. In fact, when invited to the unveiling, he declined the spotlight again. Instead, he sent a short video message, recorded from a quiet study, books behind him, tie loosened as always. "I don't need a gate named after me," he said. "I just need that gate to stay open for everyone, equally. I wasn't the first, I won't be the last, but maybe, just maybe, we're the turning point." The crowd that gathered that day stood still as the final words echoed. It started with handcuffs, but it ends with clarity, and the journey in between, that's where progress lives. Then he smiled softly. "See you at the gate." The screen faded to black, and in that moment, no one clapped. They didn't need to, because this wasn't a performance. It was a passage. And in airports around the world, from Lagos to London, from Atlanta to Amsterdam, his story now lived on, not as a trending moment, but as policy, as protections, and as proof that when dignity is defended, it creates more than noise. It creates legacy. So the next time you walk through a gate and you're treated with respect, think of the man who refused to let his cuffs define him and instead use them to unlock a future for us all. As we close this chapter, remember, Doctor, Rhodes didn't just fight for his own dignity, he fought for every person whose worth has ever been questioned based on the color of their skin. His legacy is proof that when we stand up, we don't just change the system, we transform it.